What if every foundational truth we hold dear, every story of humanity's dawn etched into our collective consciousness, was merely a carefully constructed illusion, a narrative incomplete, perhaps even deliberately obscured? What if, beneath the dust of millennia, beneath the very bedrock of our understanding, lay a message patiently waiting, its ancient voice finally poised to pierce the cacophony of the modern world? This isn't the stuff of fantastical tales spun for a rainy afternoon in a quaint English village. This is the chilling reality of forgotten histories and the staggering implications of a discovery that threatens to unravel the intricate tapestry of human civilization. We stand at the precipice of a revelation that asks us to reconsider everything, to question the very pillars upon which our understanding of antiquity and indeed our present rests. For centuries, the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia, has captivated scholars and adventurers alike. Its sun-baked plains, cradled by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, gave birth to the Sumerians, a people whose ingenuity blossomed in an era conventionally perceived as primitive. Their sophisticated cities, intricate legal codes, revolutionary irrigation systems, and pioneering advances in mathematics and astronomy often leave one wondering how such brilliance could emerge from a world so ostensibly nascent. The Sumerians, in essence, laid the groundwork for much of what we recognize as modern society. Their enduring legacy, however, is most profoundly encapsulated in their written language. Cuneiform, thousands upon thousands of clay tablets, meticulously inscribed with wedge-shaped marks, were unearthed from the ruins of cities like Uruk, Lagash, and Ur. These tablets, painstakingly translated over generations by dedicated scholars in hallowed university halls across Britain and beyond, chronicle everything from mundane administrative records and economic transactions to epic poems and complex religious rituals. They offer a window, albeit sometimes clouded by time and interpretation, into a world long gone, yet uncannily familiar in its human complexities. Yet within this vast repository of knowledge, certain artifacts have always seemed to whisper a different tune. They were the anomalies, the outliers, often relegated to the furthest corners of museum storage rooms in London or Cambridge, categorized as curious fragments or indecipherable riddles. Their inscriptions, while undoubtedly Sumerian in origin, hinted at narratives far grander, far more unsettling than mere king lists or temple inventories. They spoke of origins beyond the earthly, of knowledge transferred, and of cataclysms that echoed with an almost prophetic resonance. These were the tablets that challenged the established paradigms, often dismissed by a scholarly community steeped in tradition and resistant to narratives that veered too wildly from accepted historical timelines. The very act of acknowledging their full import would demand a re-evaluation of fundamental assumptions, a task few were willing to undertake. And so, these particular tablets, unlike their more conventional brethren, largely remained in the shadows, their profound message muffled by the passage of time and the weight of academic inertia. The journey to uncover the true nature of these forgotten Sumerian tablets began, as many such quests do, not with a grand expedition, but with a quiet, persistent curiosity in the hushed archives of a venerable British institution. Dr. Alistair Finch, a senior lecturer in Assyriology at the University of Cambridge, was not your typical tweed-clad academic. While impeccably knowledgeable in ancient languages and cultures, his mind possessed an insatiable appetite for the unconventional, a willingness to gaze beyond the footnotes and appendices of accepted wisdom. He had, for years, been drawn to the fragments, the poorly preserved, the often ignored pieces of the archaeological puzzle. He believed quite fervently that the most significant truths were often found not in the bold pronouncements of grand monuments, but in the subtle whispers of overlooked artifacts. It was a philosophy that often put him at odds with some of his more conservative colleagues, who preferred the comfort of established facts to the unsettling allure of revolutionary theories. He was known for spending countless hours in the British Museum's cuneiform collection, not just examining the famed treasures, but poring over the countless trays of uncatalogued or minimally described shards, searching for patterns where others saw only chaos. Alistair's fascination began almost 2 decades prior, sparked by a rather innocuous footnote in a dusty German dissertation from the early 20th century, which briefly mentioned a collection of unusual cosmological texts unearthed near the ancient city of Girsu, now modern Tello in Iraq. The dissertation quickly dismissed them as likely esoteric religious texts, perhaps too complex or metaphorical for straightforward translation, and therefore of limited historical value. Yet the brief description of their iconography, stylized celestial bodies arranged in an unfamiliar pattern, alongside glyphs that defied standard Sumerian phonetic interpretation, had lodged itself in Alistair's mind. He saw a potential incongruity, a hint of something deeper. The prevailing scholarly consensus dictated that Sumerian astronomy, while advanced, was primarily observational and religiously motivated, not predictive or scientific in the modern sense. But these descriptions, however vague, suggested something more systematic, almost mathematical. It was a subtle discord in the grand symphony of Sumerian knowledge that Alistair simply couldn't ignore. He dedicated his early career to mastering not just standard cuneiform, but also its rarer, more archaic forms, traveling to specialist collections in Berlin, Paris, and Philadelphia, always keeping an eye out for any mention or example of these Girsu texts. He was a familiar, if slightly eccentric figure in these circles, often found hunched over a microscope, his spectacles perched precariously on his nose, scrutinizing faint etchings that others had long given up on. He learnt Akkadian, Iblate, and Hittite, believing that understanding related Semitic languages might offer contextual clues to the Sumerian enigmas. He published several respected papers on obscure administrative texts and ancient Sumerian legal precedents, building a solid academic reputation that allowed him the freedom to pursue his more unorthodox interests without immediately inviting widespread ridicule. This careful groundwork was essential. Without a firm footing in established scholarship, his eventual more radical assertions would likely have been dismissed out of hand. The academic world, particularly in Britain, valued rigorous methodology and cautious conclusions, often viewing speculative leaps with a healthy dose of skepticism. It wasn't until a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning, amidst the organized chaos of the British Museum's West Wing, that Alistair's relentless pursuit began to yield its first tangible fruit. He was assisting a visiting American PhD student with a project on Sumerian domestic architecture, a topic far removed from his own cosmological interests. While retrieving a box of excavated pottery fragments from the Girsu site, dating back to the late 3rd millennium BCE, a small, unassuming clay tablet, accidentally placed in the wrong container, caught his eye. It was no larger than his palm, surprisingly intact, and covered in a fine layer of restoration dust. The conservator had clearly missed it, or perhaps deemed it too insignificant for immediate attention. Alistair picked it up, feeling the cool, smooth clay against his fingertips, a tangible link to a world 5 millennia past. The cuneiform script on its surface was unusually crisp, yet some of the glyphs, though superficially familiar, seemed to vibrate with an unfamiliar energy, their arrangement forming patterns that were strikingly out of sync with anything he had encountered in standard astronomical or religious texts. He felt a shiver, not of cold, but of profound recognition. This was it. This was the anomaly. The tablet's text began with what appeared to be a conventional dedication, praising a long-forgotten ruler or deity, but quickly diverged. It spoke not of earthly conquests or divine blessings, but of the celestial architects, the weaving of destinies in the cosmic loom, and the great journey of the fiery star whose return marks the turning of the ages. These phrases, while poetic, were far more specific and technically precise than typical Sumerian mythological prose. The description of the fiery star in particular carried a resonance that went beyond mere metaphor. It detailed its trajectory, its periodicity, and its distinct influence on the celestial sphere in a way that defied the limited observational tools ascribed to the Sumerians. The level of astronomical detail suggested an understanding of orbital mechanics that should have been utterly impossible for a civilization of that era. Alistair's heart pounded in his chest. He knew, with an almost primal certainty, that he had stumbled upon something extraordinary, something that could rewrite the textbooks currently gathering dust in university libraries. The implications were monumental. If these ancient scribes possessed knowledge of celestial mechanics so far advanced, knowledge that seemed to anticipate modern astrophysics, then how did they acquire it? Was it pure, unaided genius? An intellectual leap of faith so vast it defied explanation? Or was there another source, a forgotten influence, an external wisdom that had guided their hands as they pressed stylus into wet clay? The very notion threatened to dismantle cherished academic frameworks, challenging established narratives of human intellectual progression. It would mean that a substantial part of our archaeological record had been fundamentally misinterpreted, that an entire civilization's greatest secrets had been lying dormant, obscured by our own academic blind spots and preconceptions. The weight of this potential discovery, the sheer audacity of its implications, settled upon Alistair's shoulders like the heavy winter fog that often draped itself over the Cambridge fens. He knew instinctively that this small tablet was not an isolated curiosity, but a key, waiting to unlock an entire library of forgotten truths. It was a message, painstakingly crafted and preserved, designed to transcend the boundaries of time, a whisper from the deep past intended for ears in the distant future. The journey had just begun, and the path ahead promised to be fraught with challenges, revelations, and perhaps even danger. If this initial glimpse into the forgotten history of the Sumerians has captured your imagination, if it's provoked a sense of wonder or even a flicker of doubt about what you thought you knew, then you're precisely where we want you to be. What do you make of Alistair's initial discovery? Does the idea of an ancient civilization possessing such advanced knowledge resonate with you? Or does it sound too fantastical? Leave a comment below with your initial thoughts and join the conversation. Your participation is vital in bringing these important, often overlooked narratives to light. If this kind of profound historical inquiry and the pursuit of hidden truths appeals to you, then this channel delivers exactly what you need. So, do us a favor, subscribe and activate the bell, because what comes next is an even deeper dive into the mysteries that refuse to stay buried. Alistair's initial excitement, a potent cocktail of intellectual exhilaration and a healthy dose of trepidation, quickly coalesced into a focused determination. He knew he couldn't simply present his findings to the wider academic community without a more robust body of evidence. Such radical claims, especially concerning the reinterpretation of established Sumerian astronomy, would be met with immediate, perhaps even hostile, skepticism. He envisioned the frosty reception, the polite but pointed questions from senior professors, the dismissive murmurs about speculative readings and over-imaginative interpretations. The world of British academia, while valuing innovation, also revered tradition and robust peer-reviewed evidence. He needed more tablets, more corroborating texts, more pieces of the puzzle that would, collectively, paint an undeniable picture. His flat, usually a meticulously organized haven of ancient texts and research papers, began to transform into a war room. Maps of ancient Mesopotamia were unfurled across the dining table, marked with red circles around Girsu and its surrounding sites. He spent his evenings poring over museum inventories, catalogue entries, and even dusty excavation reports from the early 20th century, seeking any mention, however fleeting, of tablets similar to the one he had found. The search was akin to looking for a particular grain of sand on a vast beach, yet Alistair was convinced the patterns he sought were there, waiting to be connected. He also understood the political landscape of academia. To challenge the prevailing narrative was to challenge the careers and legacies built upon it. This was not merely an intellectual exercise, it was a potential revolution. His closest confidant, and perhaps the only person he felt comfortable sharing his nascent theories with, was Professor Eleanor Vance, a formidable archaeologist from the University of London. Eleanor, with her sharp wit and even sharper intellect, specialized in early Bronze Age urbanization and had worked extensively in Iraq during the relatively more stable periods of the late 1970s and early 1980s. She possessed a pragmatic, no-nonsense approach to archaeology, valuing empirical data above all else, but she also held a deep respect for Alistair's unorthodox intuition. He remembered their first meeting at a rather dreary academic conference in Leeds, where he had dared to suggest a link between certain Sumerian ritual practices and astronomical cycles that went beyond seasonal observation. Eleanor, initially skeptical, had challenged him vigorously, but had later sought him out, intrigued by the depth of his research. She was the perfect sounding board, critical, rigorous, yet open to unconventional ideas if they were supported by evidence. Over lukewarm cups of builder's tea in her cluttered office overlooking Russell Square, Alistair laid out his findings, detailing the unusual glyphs, the startling astronomical data, and his growing conviction that these tablets represented a hidden layer of Sumerian knowledge. Eleanor listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration, occasionally interjecting with sharp, incisive questions that cut directly to the heart of his arguments. She didn't dismiss him outright. Instead, she saw the intriguing potential, the carefully considered deductions that lay beneath his daring hypothesis. Their collaborative efforts began in earnest. Eleanor, leveraging her extensive network within the archaeological community, discreetly inquired about unpublished Girsu tablets or fragments held in lesser-known collections, particularly those that had been excavated by British teams but perhaps not fully translated or catalogued due to their perceived esoteric nature or poor condition. Many of these older excavations, conducted by Victorian and Edwardian adventurers, driven more by the thrill of discovery than meticulous academic record-keeping, had resulted in vast troves of artifacts being shipped back to Britain, often with incomplete provenance or cursory descriptions. These were the historical equivalent of dusty attics full of forgotten treasures. Alistair, meanwhile, embarked on a deep dive into the archives of the British Museum and other institutions, meticulously cross-referencing old excavation notes with current catalogue numbers, hoping to unearth references to tablets that matched the stylistic and thematic peculiarities of his initial find. He developed a complex search algorithm, employing machine learning techniques he'd taught himself to scan digitized cuneiform texts for recurring, non-standard glyph patterns and specific keyword combinations related to celestial phenomena that extended beyond standard Sumerian cosmology. It was a painstaking, often frustrating process, filled with dead ends and false positives, but Alistair's conviction never wavered. He felt an almost spiritual connection to the scribes of Girsu, a sense that they were reaching out across the gulf of time, their message waiting for someone with the patience and insight to receive it. One evening, deep in the British Museum's online database, Alistair struck gold. A series of tablets, catalogued under the rather generic title Miscellaneous Cultic Texts, Girsu, bore a striking resemblance to his own tablet in terms of clay composition, script style, and the peculiar nature of some of its glyphs. The catalogue entry, dating back to the 1930s, noted that they were difficult to interpret, possibly symbolic or allegorical. It was the academic equivalent of a shrug. For Alistair, it was a siren call. He immediately requested access, and within days found himself once again in the hushed, climate-controlled environment of the museum's specialist reading room, surrounded by conservators and fellow researchers. The collection consisted of 17 fragments, some no bigger than a fingernail, others nearly complete, all bearing the same distinctive characteristics as his initial find. As he carefully examined each piece, the narrative began to coalesce with startling clarity. These weren't allegories or metaphors. They were precise, detailed observations and predictions. The fiery star reappeared, but this time with more explicit details of its elliptical orbit, its periodic disruption of the inner solar system, and even its composition. A heavenly wanderer of ice and stone, trailing a luminous veil. This was not just astronomy. It was proto-astrophysics, descriptions that mirrored the characteristics of a large comet, or even a dwarf planet with a highly eccentric orbit, an object far beyond what Sumerian telescopes, non-existent, or naked-eye observation could discern. The implications were profound. How could the Sumerians, without advanced optical instruments or the mathematical framework of Newtonian physics, possess such detailed knowledge? The tablets spoke not of observing these phenomena, but of being shown them, of wisdom passed down from the celestial ones. This was the truly revolutionary aspect, the part that would challenge every established academic dogma. It hinted at a transmission of knowledge, a direct communication from an intelligence or source far beyond the conventional understanding of human history. Eleanor, upon reviewing Alistair's meticulous translations and photographic evidence, was visibly shaken. She, a pragmatist to her core, initially struggled with the implications, her archaeological training screaming against such unconventional conclusions. Yet, the evidence was undeniable. The consistency across multiple fragments, the technical precision of the language, the lack of any known Sumerian equivalent for such advanced concepts, it all pointed to a singular, extraordinary truth. "Blimey, Alistair," she had murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "If this is what it seems, then everything we thought we knew is just a preamble. This isn't just a discovery. It's a paradigm shift. We're going to need more than tea and biscuits to get through this one." The understated British humour masked a deep-seated unease and a dawning realization of the immense task ahead. They were no longer merely academics. They were custodians of a secret that could reshape humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. The forgotten tablets were finally beginning to speak, and their message was far more complex and far more unsettling than anyone could have ever imagined. What do you think is the most challenging aspect of deciphering ancient texts that seem to contradict established historical narratives? Have you ever encountered a historical account that made you question everything? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Perhaps you've even found yourself in a situation where challenging the status quo felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Write down your feelings. This is unbelievable. Let us know what you think about this astounding revelation. The collaborative efforts of Alistair and Eleanor intensified, moving from hushed conversations in university offices to clandestine meetings in quiet London pubs, their discussions often punctuated by the clinking of glasses and the murmur of evening chatter. The sheer volume of data Alistair had uncovered, the 17 new fragments, combined with his initial discovery, now formed a compelling, albeit still controversial dossier. They meticulously cross-referenced the astronomical data within the texts with modern astronomical models, consulting with astrophysicists who, while initially amused by the ancient alien whispers, became increasingly intrigued by the uncanny precision of the Sumerian observations. The tablets described not only the fiery star's orbital period, estimated by Alistair to be approximately 3,600 years, but also its subtle gravitational effects on the outer planets, phenomena that could only be detected with advanced instrumentation or through prolonged, generations-long observation. The Sumerians, it seemed, had somehow recorded knowledge that spanned millennia, far exceeding the lifespan of any single human observer. This pointed, unequivocally, to a continuous institutionalized recording of information, or more controversially, to a source of knowledge that predated Sumerian civilization itself. The celestial architects weren't just a poetic flourish. They were beginning to sound suspiciously like real entities, or at least a highly advanced preceding civilization. The tablets also contained a series of what Alistair tentatively called directives, or warnings. These were not prophecies in the conventional sense, filled with ambiguous omens and mythical beasts, but rather precise instructions on societal organization, resource management, and even genetic preservation. They detailed cycles of geological upheaval and climatic shifts linked directly to the fiery star's perihelion passage, its closest approach to the sun. The text spoke of preparing the earth for renewal, of sheltering the seeds of life, and of transmitting the knowledge to those who would inherit the desolate world. It was a staggering revelation, a detailed survival manual from antiquity, seemingly designed to guide humanity through recurrent global catastrophes. This moved the narrative beyond mere astronomical curiosity into the realm of existential warnings, transforming the forgotten tablets into a potential instruction manual for survival. Eleanor, ever the pragmatist, found herself grappling with the magnitude of these implications. Her archaeological training, focused on material culture and societal structures, had rarely ventured into such speculative territory. Yet the texts were undeniably specific, their instructions remarkably consistent across multiple fragments. They described techniques for preserving seeds in underground vaults, methods for purifying water, and even detailed diagrams for constructing structures resilient to seismic activity and flooding, remarkably similar to some modern disaster preparedness blueprints. The question of how such knowledge could have been encoded and preserved for so long became a central focus of their research. The tablets themselves, while durable, were still susceptible to the ravages of time, war, and natural disaster. The solution, Alistair theorized, lay in the Sumerian emphasis on ritual and repetition. These weren't just one-off inscriptions. They were likely part of a meticulously maintained, periodically refreshed canon of sacred texts, perhaps copied and recopied across generations, ensuring their survival. The difficult-to-interpret glyphs, he now believed, were a form of mnemonic device, a coded language designed to trigger specific memories or interpretations in specially trained individuals, perhaps an ancient priesthood or a secret scholarly caste. It was an ingenious system of information preservation, hiding in plain sight, its true meaning veiled by the very reverence it commanded. The tablets, therefore, served not just as records, but as an active mechanism for transmitting critical knowledge across vast spans of time, an ancient time capsule awaiting its destined unlock. The very act of hiding the truth in plain sight, using religious and cultural significance as a protective layer, was a stroke of genius, ensuring the texts wouldn't be destroyed by conquerors or dismissed by later, less enlightened generations. As their understanding deepened, a chilling pattern began to emerge. The tablets not only warned of future cataclysms, but also contained vivid accounts of past ones, strikingly similar to global flood myths and periods of intense geological instability described in various ancient cultures worldwide. The narrative spoke of the great deluge that cleansed the earth, of mountains shaking and heavens falling, and of the sun being hidden by a shroud of dust for many years. These were not just localized events, they were global in scale, echoing the younger Dryas impact theory, or other periods of rapid climate change and asteroid impacts that have been proposed by modern geologists and paleoclimatologists. The Sumerian Tablets, far from being isolated historical curiosities, appeared to be part of a much larger, global narrative, a Rosetta Stone for understanding humanity's deep past and its recurring vulnerability to cosmic forces. This shifted the entire project from a purely academic endeavor into something far more urgent and universally significant. What if these ancient warnings were not just historical records, but a pressing, imminent danger? What if the fiery star was due to return? The discovery prompted a serious, albeit secret, debate between Alistair and Eleanor about the responsible dissemination of such potentially world-altering information. The implications were staggering. If their interpretations were correct, then humanity was living under the potential threat of a recurring celestial event, a threat that had been meticulously documented and warned against by one of the earliest civilizations. Releasing this information without careful preparation could cause mass panic, geopolitical instability, and social unrest on an unprecedented scale. They considered approaching the British government, perhaps MI5 or the Ministry of Defence, but quickly dismissed the idea. The bureaucratic hurdles, the inevitable skepticism, and the potential for the information to be classified and suppressed made it an untenable option. They agreed that the knowledge needed to be brought to light, but in a controlled, responsible manner, allowing humanity to gradually absorb and prepare for its ramifications. They decided to compile a comprehensive, meticulously footnoted academic paper, presenting their findings in a dispassionate scientific manner, allowing the evidence to speak for itself rather than resorting to sensationalism. They knew the paper would cause a storm, but they believed it was the only way to introduce such profound concepts into the public consciousness through legitimate academic channels. The more they delved into the texts, the more they realized the tablets weren't just a record of celestial events and survival strategies. They were also a philosophical treatise, a profound meditation on humanity's place in the cosmos. The celestial architects, if not literal beings, represented a concept of cosmic order and interconnectedness, a profound understanding of the universe that transcended mere human perception. The texts implied that humanity was not alone, not insignificant, but part of a grand, recurring cosmic drama. The message wasn't just a warning, it was an invitation to look beyond our immediate earthly concerns, to embrace a larger, more profound understanding of existence. It was a call to awaken, to prepare, and to remember a legacy that had been deliberately forgotten, or perhaps simply obscured by the passage of ages and the shifting sands of human perception. The weight of this ancient wisdom pressed down upon Alistair and Eleanor, transforming their academic pursuit into a mission of vital importance. The forgotten tablets, once dismissed as esoteric fragments, were now screaming their profound truth across the millennia, their voice amplified by the tireless dedication of two unassuming British scholars. The world was about to change, whether it was ready or not. What do you think of the concept of celestial architects? Do you believe it points to ancient alien intervention, a highly advanced precursor human civilization, or something else entirely? Could ancient texts contain survival guides for future catastrophes? Comment below with your theories and perspectives. This is the kind of mind-bending history that makes you rethink everything. The decision to publish their findings, however carefully curated, inevitably cast Alistair and Eleanor into the harsh glare of academic scrutiny and public speculation. Their paper, initially submitted to a prestigious but conservative journal of Near Eastern Studies, was met with a predictably mixed reception. Some scholars hailed it as a groundbreaking reinterpretation of Sumerian civilization, praising the meticulous linguistic analysis and the daring interdisciplinary approach. Others, particularly those whose life's work revolved around more conventional interpretations of Sumerian culture, reacted with outright hostility, dismissing the astronomical claims as pseudoscience and the directives as a flight of fancy, fueled by an overactive imagination. The journal's editorial board, caught in the crossfire, eventually published the paper, but with an extensive disclaimer emphasizing the highly speculative nature of some of the conclusions. It was a compromise that satisfied no one entirely, but it cracked open the door, allowing the controversial ideas to seep into the wider academic discourse. The ensuing debates filled academic forums and conferences, turning previously dry lectures into passionate, often heated exchanges. The media, always keen for a sensational story, quickly caught wind of the controversy. Tabloid newspapers ran headlines screaming about ancient alien warnings and doomsday tablets, reducing years of meticulous research to clickbait. While Alistair and Eleanor tried to maintain a dignified academic distance, offering interviews only to reputable science journals and BBC documentaries, the narrative began to spin out of their control. Their carefully constructed arguments were often distorted, their nuanced interpretations reduced to simplistic, often alarmist, soundbites. Alistair found himself fielding calls from conspiracy theorists, amateur archaeologists, and even religious fundamentalists, all eager to co-opt his findings for their own agendas. It was a stark reminder of the challenges inherent in introducing such profound and disruptive knowledge to a public often more interested in sensationalism than substance. Eleanor, with her years of experience dealing with the public, often stepped in, providing a calm, authoritative voice amidst the storm, reminding interviewers of the rigorous methodology and the empirical basis of their findings. Yet even her measured responses couldn't entirely quell the tide of public imagination, which had already seized upon the more dramatic elements of the story. Amidst the swirling controversy, however, a critical mass of genuine scientific curiosity began to form. Astrophysicists, initially skeptical, started to independently verify Alistair's astronomical calculations, comparing the Sumerian fiery star data with known cometary and dwarf planet orbits. To their astonishment, some found a striking correlation between the described orbital characteristics and those of hypothetical, long-period celestial bodies. While no direct celestial object was immediately identified, the precision of the ancient data was undeniable, sparking a dedicated research effort within the astronomical community. Geologists and paleoclimatologists also became involved, examining the tablets' descriptions of ancient cataclysms against geological records of the Younger Dryas impact event and other periods of rapid climate change. The Sumerian accounts, once dismissed as mythological hyperbole, began to resonate with increasing scientific credibility, prompting a re-examination of ancient global flood narratives, not as mere myths, but as potential historical memories of very real, devastating events. The tablets were no longer just an archaeological curiosity. They had become a transdisciplinary scientific enigma, forcing experts from disparate fields to collaborate and confront a truly unsettling possibility. The most unsettling aspect of the tablets, however, remained the directives, the detailed instructions for societal resilience and species preservation. As researchers delved deeper into these texts, they uncovered sophisticated knowledge of agricultural resilience, sustainable living, and even complex social engineering designed to maintain cohesion during periods of extreme crisis. The instructions for seed vaults, for instance, outlined precise atmospheric conditions, temperature controls, and even genetic diversity management that mirrored contemporary global seed banks, such as the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. This suggested an understanding of biology and environmental science that was millennia ahead of its time. The tablets weren't just warning, they were offering solutions, a blueprint for survival passed down from a time when humanity, by all conventional accounts, should have been struggling with basic subsistence farming. The question then shifted from how did they know to why did they know and what can we learn from it now? It became increasingly clear that the Sumerians, or their mysterious celestial architects, were not just passive observers but active participants in the long-term survival of life on Earth. This growing body of multidisciplinary evidence began to chip away at the initial academic resistance. Slowly, grudgingly, even the most conservative scholars started to acknowledge the undeniable patterns and the perplexing precision of the Sumerian texts. The narrative of human history, previously a relatively linear progression from simple hunter-gatherers to complex civilizations, now faced a significant, almost incomprehensible anomaly. The idea of a lost, advanced precursor civilization, or even an external influence, once relegated to the fringes of alternative history, began to gain a fragile foothold in mainstream academic discourse, albeit cautiously and with many caveats. The Sumerian Tablets, once forgotten in museum storerooms, were now forcing a fundamental re-evaluation of humanity's origins, its capabilities, and its potential future. The world of archaeology, traditionally focused on excavating the past, suddenly found itself grappling with a message that had profound implications for the future. The ancient Sumerians, through these enigmatic texts, were reaching out, not just to recount history, but to offer a stern warning and perhaps a path forward. Alistair and Eleanor, despite the pressure and the relentless public scrutiny, remained steadfast in their mission. They understood the immense responsibility that came with their discovery. They were not merely translating ancient texts, they were deciphering a message of critical importance, a legacy of foresight and survival. They refused to be drawn into sensationalism or to allow their work to be co-opted by fringe theories. Their focus remained on rigorous scientific validation, on bringing together experts from diverse fields to unravel the full scope of the Sumerian message. They organized international symposiums, inviting specialists in everything from ancient languages to orbital mechanics and disaster preparedness, fostering an environment of collaborative inquiry rather than divisive debate. The goal was no longer just to prove the tablets' authenticity or their controversial claims, but to fully understand their implications and to act upon the knowledge they contained. The forgotten tablets were finally remembered, and their silent wisdom was now echoing loudly across the globe, demanding attention and, perhaps, action. What would be your immediate reaction if you discovered that an ancient civilization had accurately predicted future global catastrophes? How do you think modern society would cope with such knowledge? Comment below with your honest thoughts on the societal implications. It's a question that makes you pause and reflect on our own vulnerabilities. The growing recognition of the tablet's scientific significance, propelled by interdisciplinary corroboration, began to attract a different kind of attention, the kind that prefers to operate in the shadows. Hints of institutional interest, quiet inquiries from government bodies, and subtle shifts in research funding priorities started to emerge. Alistair and Eleanor, initially focused on academic debates, soon found themselves navigating a more complex, less transparent landscape. Small, innocuous details began to surface, like the sudden and unexpected restriction of access to certain archival materials related to the Girsu excavations, or the unexplained disappearance of obscure early 20th century expedition logs that might have contained further references to similar tablets. It felt as if unseen hands were attempting to control the narrative, to manage the flow of information, or perhaps even to suppress further revelations. The sense of being watched, a subtle but persistent unease, settled over them. They were no longer just scholars. They were custodians of information that carried geopolitical and potentially existential weight. One particularly unnerving incident occurred during a presentation Alistair gave at a seemingly innocuous academic conference in Edinburgh. Midway through his lecture, during a discussion of the fiery star's projected trajectory, the projector flickered and died. A quick-thinking technician restored power, but Alistair noticed a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, a sudden stillness among certain audience members who had previously been quite vocal. Later, he received an anonymous email, encrypted and untraceable, containing a single line: "Some truths are best left buried, Dr. Finch, for your own good." While easily dismissed as the ramblings of a zealous conspiracy theorist, the timing and the precision of the message sent a cold shiver down Alistair's spine. Eleanor, ever pragmatic, suggested they take extra precautions, installing encrypted communication channels and limiting their discussions to secure locations. "We're treading on some very sensitive ground, Alistair," she had cautioned, her voice low and serious. "History isn't just about the past, it's about power, and what you're uncovering could shift the balance of it entirely. There are always those who benefit from ignorance or from controlling knowledge. The narrative embedded within the tablets, particularly the directives for survival, began to pose uncomfortable questions for modern governments and global institutions. The ancient texts spoke of a necessary reorganization of society, a shift away from rampant consumerism and territorial conflicts towards a unified, collaborative effort for species survival. They detailed strategies for sustainable resource management, equitable distribution of resources, and even a form of planetary stewardship that was remarkably prescient, given our current environmental crises. This ancient blueprint for a resilient civilization stood in stark contrast to the fragmented, often self-serving approaches of contemporary nation-states. The implications were clear. If humanity was to heed the ancient warnings and prepare for future cataclysms, it would require a level of global cooperation and systemic change that currently seemed unattainable. This placed the Sumerian tablets not just in the realm of history or science, but firmly within the political arena, creating an intersection of ancient wisdom and modern governance that few were prepared to navigate. The celestial architects themselves remained the most enigmatic aspect of the tablets. Were they literal beings, an extraterrestrial intelligence that had visited Earth in humanity's distant past, sharing their advanced knowledge? Or were they a highly advanced, lost human civilization, wiped out by one of the very cataclysms they foretold, their legacy preserved through these coded messages? The tablets offered no definitive answer, deliberately shrouding their origin in ambiguity, perhaps to ensure the focus remained on the message itself rather than the messenger. This deliberate vagueness, however, only fueled further speculation and deepened the mystery. Alistair, ever the rationalist, leaned towards the possibility of a lost human precursor, a civilization whose technological and intellectual prowess far exceeded what archaeologists currently understood of humanity's early history. Eleanor, more open to cosmological possibilities, entertained the notion of an external influence, noting the Sumerians' almost reverential descriptions of these architects as those who came from above. The debate was profound, touching upon the very essence of human exceptionalism and our place in the universe. The potential for exploitation of this knowledge also became a growing concern. The directives contained details on resilient construction, advanced agricultural techniques, and even methods for long-term energy storage. In the wrong hands, such information could be weaponized or monopolized, exacerbating existing inequalities rather than fostering global resilience. Alistair and Eleanor became increasingly aware of the need to protect their research, to ensure that the ancient wisdom meant for the benefit of all humanity was not corrupted or controlled by a select few. They began digitizing their entire archive, creating multiple encrypted backups stored in geographically diverse locations, a digital fortress against any attempts at suppression or theft. They understood that the tablets were not just historical artifacts. They were a living testament, a ticking clock, and their message was increasingly urgent. The silent whispers from Girsu were now a powerful clarion call, demanding humanity's attention, warning of perils, and offering a potential roadmap to survival. The stakes, they realized, had become incredibly high. The true challenge, however, wasn't just in deciphering the tablets or defending their research. It was in galvanizing a fractured, often complacent, modern world to heed an ancient warning. How do you convince billions of people accustomed to immediate gratification and short-term thinking to prepare for a recurring celestial event millennia in the making? How do you overcome the inertia of geopolitical rivalries and economic self-interest to foster the global cooperation required by the Sumerian blueprint? The tablets, they realized, were not just a historical curiosity or a scientific marvel. They were a profound moral challenge, a test of humanity's capacity for foresight, unity, and survival. The message from the forgotten Sumerians was finally heard, but whether it would be truly understood and acted upon remained the most profound question of all. The fate of humanity, it seemed, might well depend on whether we chose to listen to the distant echoes of a forgotten past. What do you think is the biggest hurdle to global cooperation, even in the face of an existential threat revealed by ancient texts? Would you trust information from an ancient civilization about a future catastrophe? Comment below with your thoughts on how humanity might react. This is a crucial conversation we all need to be having. The pressure mounted exponentially as the weight of their discovery settled more firmly upon Alistair and Eleanor's shoulders. The academic discussions, while still robust, were increasingly overshadowed by geopolitical anxieties. Intelligence agencies from around the globe, alerted by the persistent rumor mill and leaked snippets of their research, began to take a keen, often disconcerting interest. Alistair, usually ensconced in the cloistered world of academia, now found himself discreetly approached by individuals who identified themselves only by their first names, offering veiled warnings and thinly disguised requests for collaboration. These interactions were always polite, impeccably British in their understated menace, but the underlying message was clear. This information was too sensitive to remain in purely academic hands. Eleanor, leveraging her connections from years of international fieldwork, confirmed their suspicions. Multiple governments were now monitoring their movements, their communications, and even their research data. They were no longer simply scholars. They had become unwitting players in a high-stakes global game. Their ancient knowledge now a matter of national security, or perhaps planetary security. The concept of a recurring fiery star, capable of causing global cataclysms every few millennia, began to filter into the highest echelons of power. Secret briefings were held in windowless rooms in Whitehall and Washington, presenting Alistair and Eleanor's findings to a new audience of strategists and policymakers. The directives for societal resilience, once dismissed as ancient superstitions, were now being scrutinized by think tanks and disaster preparedness agencies. The idea of constructing vast, underground seed vaults and self-sustaining bunkers, once the preserve of survivalists and science fiction writers, suddenly took on a grim, practical urgency. The Sumerian blueprint for a unified global response, however, remained the most challenging aspect. Deep-seated nationalistic rivalries, economic protectionism, and a pervasive lack of trust made genuine international cooperation an uphill battle. The ancient warnings served as a stark mirror, reflecting humanity's current divisions and its profound inability to act collectively in the face of an overarching threat. The irony was not lost on Alistair. The Sumerians, millennia ago, had apparently understood the imperative of unity far better than their modern descendants. Amidst this growing external pressure, the internal debate between Alistair and Eleanor intensified. Should they fully disclose all the tablet's contents to the public, risking mass panic and societal breakdown? Or should they continue to control the flow of information, working discreetly with international bodies to prepare for the inevitable, even if it meant withholding potentially vital knowledge from the broader populace? Alistair, always driven by the pursuit of truth, argued for full transparency. "This isn't our secret to keep, Eleanor," he'd insisted during a heated discussion over a late-night cuppa in her flat. "The Sumerians left this message for all of humanity. To withhold it, even with good intentions, is to deny people the right to prepare, to understand their own history and their potential future." Eleanor, however, harbored deep concerns about the potential for chaos. "Imagine the headlines, Alistair. The financial markets would collapse, governments would fall. We'd have anarchy on our hands before the fiery star was even a smudge in the sky. Preparation requires stability, not pandemonium. We need to manage this carefully." Their disagreement was not ideological. It was a profound ethical dilemma, a battle between the right to know and the need for order. The tablets also contained a series of highly enigmatic, almost mystical texts that spoke of the awakening of consciousness and the unlocking of latent human potential during periods of cosmic alignment with the fiery star. These passages, initially dismissed as purely religious or metaphorical, began to take on a new significance as Alistair delved deeper into comparative mythology and ancient wisdom traditions. Many cultures spoke of golden ages or periods of enlightenment linked to celestial events. Could the Sumerians have encoded not just warnings of disaster, but also a hidden key to human evolution, a means of adapting and thriving in the face of recurring planetary challenges? This particular aspect of the tablets hinted at a profound, almost spiritual dimension to the ancient message, suggesting that the celestial architects weren't just concerned with physical survival, but with the intellectual and spiritual development of humanity. It implied that the cataclysms were not just destructive events, but also catalysts for profound transformation, resetting the human condition and prompting periods of accelerated growth and innovation. This deeper, more philosophical layer of the Sumerian message added another layer of complexity to their dilemma. If humanity's survival wasn't just about bunkers and seed banks, but also about a fundamental shift in consciousness, how could that be communicated? It moved beyond science and policy into the nebulous realm of spirituality and collective psychology. Alistair, usually grounded in empirical data, found himself contemplating the idea that ancient civilizations possessed a holistic understanding of existence that modern science had largely discarded. The tablets were not just a historical record, they were a profound philosophical treatise, an intricate tapestry woven with threads of astronomy, geology, sociology, and spirituality, all intricately linked to the rhythm of the cosmos. The forgotten Sumerians, it seemed, had left humanity a comprehensive guide, not just to surviving the physical challenges of a recurring celestial visitor, but to evolving beyond the limitations of our current understanding, reaching for a higher state of collective consciousness. The next critical step involved validating the fiery star's return. Working discreetly with a select group of independent astrophysicists at the Royal Observatory, Edinburgh, Alistair and Eleanor used the Sumerian orbital data to model potential candidates for this elusive celestial body. The results, though preliminary and requiring further validation, were chilling. Their models suggested a high probability of a large, eccentric cometary object, or even a previously uncatalogued dwarf planet, on a trajectory that would bring it dangerously close to the inner solar system within the next few centuries. The time frame was uncertain, but the threat was very real. This wasn't a distant, abstract possibility. It was a looming, tangible danger, bringing the ancient warnings into horrifying contemporary focus. The urgency of their mission, once a theoretical academic pursuit, now felt acutely visceral. The Sumerian tablets were no longer a historical curiosity. They were a ticking time bomb, and Alistair and Eleanor found themselves caught between the deafening silence of a complacent world and the insistent whispers of a 5,000-year-old warning. The message had finally reached its intended recipients, but the question remained: would humanity listen? What do you make of the idea that ancient cataclysms might also be catalysts for human evolution and consciousness? Could a recurring celestial event be linked to profound shifts in human understanding? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. It's a truly mind-bending concept that challenges our perception of progress. The independent verification of a potential celestial object matching the Sumerian descriptions sent ripples of genuine alarm through the secretive government circles that had been monitoring Alistair and Eleanor's work. The polite inquiries intensified, morphing into thinly veiled demands for all research data, analyses, and most disturbingly, the location of the original tablets themselves. Alistair and Eleanor, however, had anticipated this. They had already taken measures to secure the most critical pieces of evidence, distributing encrypted copies of their findings to trusted colleagues in various independent institutions across Europe, ensuring that the knowledge could not be easily suppressed or controlled by any single entity. The original tablets, of course, remained in the British Museum, their public accessibility a testament to their unwavering commitment to scholarly transparency, despite the growing pressure. The fight for the truth was no longer just an academic battle. It was a struggle for intellectual freedom against the encroaching shadow of state control. The ethical dilemma regarding full disclosure versus controlled dissemination became even more acute. The Royal Observatory team, having refined their models, confirmed that the predicted perihelion passage of the fiery star would indeed occur within a window of approximately 150 to 300 years from now. This time frame, while not immediate, was close enough to represent a tangible threat to future generations, demanding proactive measures and a concerted global effort. It was no longer a theoretical exercise for a distant future. It was a problem that this humanity, needed to begin addressing now. Alistair argued that the public had a right to know not just about the threat, but about the Sumerian blueprint for survival. We owe it to them, Eleanor, he pleaded, to give them the tools, the knowledge that the ancients so painstakingly preserved. Eleanor, however, remained cautious, haunted by the spectres of mass panic and exploitation. Knowledge is power, Alistair, and power can be abused. We need a plan, a framework before we drop this bombshell on an unsuspecting world. Their profound respect for each other's intellect, however, prevented their disagreements from becoming irreparable. Instead, they pushed each other to think more deeply, to consider every angle of this unprecedented challenge. The tablet's intricate survival directives came under intense scrutiny from global experts. The Sumerian techniques for constructing earthquake-resistant structures, preserving genetic material, and establishing self-sustaining communities in the aftermath of widespread devastation were found to be remarkably robust and, in some cases, surprisingly superior to current methods. One particular tablet detailed a method of atmospheric conditioning for subterranean habitats that far exceeded anything currently in use, promising unparalleled resilience against extreme climatic shifts. This was the most compelling evidence yet that the Sumerian knowledge was not just an observational record, but a practical guide, perhaps developed from direct experience with such cataclysms. It led to a radical re-evaluation of early human technological capabilities, suggesting a far more advanced understanding of engineering and environmental science than traditionally accepted. The forgotten tablets were not merely historical documents. They were a hidden manual for humanity's future, a testament to a forgotten wisdom that could still save us. The concept of the celestial architects continued to be a source of profound debate. Alistair, leaning towards a precursor human civilization, began investigating archaeological anomalies around the globe, underwater cities, geoglyphs, and ancient megalithic structures that defy conventional explanation. He hypothesized that if such an advanced human civilization existed, their legacy might be found not just in Mesopotamia, but in scattered fragments across the planet, hinting at a global network of knowledge and perhaps even a unified global culture that predated our own. Eleanor, meanwhile, started exploring ancient myths and legends that spoke of sky gods or teachers from the stars, searching for common threads that might point to an extraterrestrial influence. She found striking parallels in the myths of various indigenous peoples, suggesting a shared cosmic memory, a collective cultural echo of a time when humanity was guided by an external intelligence. The true origin of the celestial architects remained elusive, a tantalizing mystery woven into the fabric of the Sumerian message, perhaps deliberately left ambiguous to encourage humanity to seek its own answers. The increasing government scrutiny also brought forth a new layer of complexity, the potential for corporate interest. The survival technologies detailed in the tablets, sustainable agriculture, resilient infrastructure, advanced resource management, represented immense economic opportunities. Private consortiums, sensing a potential goldmine in catastrophe preparedness, began to subtly maneuver for access to Alistair and Eleanor's research, offering lavish funding and resources in exchange for exclusive rights. This added another formidable challenge to their mission, protecting the ancient wisdom from privatization and commercial exploitation. They understood that the Sumerian message, meant for the common good, could easily be distorted and commodified, leading to a world where survival became a luxury rather than a universal right. The battle for the tablet's interpretation and dissemination was no longer just about truth. It was about the control of knowledge and the future of human society itself. Despite the growing pressures, Alistair and Eleanor found solace and renewed determination in the sheer profundity of the Sumerian message itself. The tablets weren't just about fear and survival, they were also about resilience, adaptation, and the enduring spirit of humanity. They contained passages that spoke of hope, of renewal, and of the opportunity for conscious evolution that each cataclysm presented. The fiery star was not just a harbinger of destruction, but a cyclical force that purged and renewed, offering humanity a chance to rebuild, to learn from past mistakes, and to aspire to a higher collective existence. This philosophical depth resonated deeply with both scholars, transforming their scientific quest into a profound human endeavor. They realized that their ultimate task was not just to warn, but to inspire, not just to present facts, but to ignite hope and foster a sense of shared destiny. The forgotten Sumerian tablets, once silent and obscure, were now speaking with an eloquence and urgency that demanded humanity's complete attention, not just to avert a coming disaster, but to embrace a profound opportunity for transformation. Do you think a global catastrophe could ever unite humanity, or would it simply deepen our divisions? Is it possible for humanity to collectively prepare for such a long-term threat? Comment below with your thoughts on the sociological and psychological impact of this kind of ancient warning. The world stage was now unmistakably set for the Sumerian revelations. The subtle shifts in policy, the clandestine meetings, and the heightened governmental and corporate interest all pointed to an impending moment of truth. Alistair and Eleanor, exhausted but resolute, knew that the time for quiet academic discourse was drawing to a close. The models were refined, the translations meticulously verified, and the multidisciplinary corroboration was robust. The fiery star was no longer a theoretical construct. It was a looming reality, confirmed by independent astronomical observations, albeit not yet widely publicized. The dilemma of full disclosure versus managed release had reached its critical juncture. They had compiled an exhaustive report, distilling years of painstaking research into a comprehensive document that presented the Sumerian texts, their translations, the corroborating scientific data, and the ancient directives for survival. It was a document destined to shake the foundations of human civilization. Their decision to release the report was not made lightly. After weeks of intense debate, weighing the risks of panic against the imperative of global preparedness, they concluded that humanity deserved to know. To withhold such critical information would be a betrayal of the ancient scribes' trust and a denial of humanity's collective right to self-determination. However, they understood that the manner of release was crucial. It could not be a sensational leak or a tabloid exposé. It needed to be presented with the gravitas and intellectual rigor it demanded. They chose an unconventional but strategically sound approach, a coordinated release through a network of trusted international academic institutions, simultaneously publishing peer-reviewed articles in major scientific journals and disseminating the full report through secure open-source platforms. This multi-pronged strategy aimed to bypass potential governmental censorship and corporate control, ensuring the information reached the widest possible audience unfiltered. The immediate aftermath was, predictably, chaotic. The academic community exploded, with fierce debates reigniting and new factions emerging. Some scholars rallied behind Alistair and Eleanor, hailing them as visionary pioneers. Others, however, doubled down on their skepticism, accusing them of academic malpractice and fear-mongering. The public reaction was even more extreme. Global financial markets plunged as initial reports of a recurring celestial threat spread like wildfire. Governments struggled to contain the panic, issuing conflicting statements that only exacerbated the confusion. Social media platforms became cesspools of speculation, conspiracy theories, and apocalyptic prophecies, overwhelming traditional news outlets. The world was gripped by a mixture of fear, bewilderment, and a dawning, terrifying realization that the foundations of their reality had been profoundly shaken. Alistair and Eleanor found themselves at the eye of a global storm, the target of both adulation and intense vilification. Yet, amidst the chaos, a remarkable phenomenon began to emerge, a genuine thirst for knowledge. As the initial panic subsided, people began to seek out the actual report, to read the ancient texts for themselves, to understand the scientific data, and to grapple with the implications. Online forums dedicated to dissecting the Sumerian tablets mushroomed, attracting millions of participants from every corner of the globe. Scientists, engineers, philosophers, and ordinary citizens engaged in unprecedented levels of public discourse, debating the nuances of the translations, the validity of the astronomical models, and the practicality of the ancient survival directives. The Sumerian message, once confined to dusty museum shelves, had become the most important conversation on the planet. This collective engagement, this sudden surge of global curiosity and critical thinking, was perhaps the most unexpected and profound outcome of their disclosure. Humanity, it seemed, was starting to listen. The ancient directives for sustainable living and disaster preparedness, initially dismissed by many, now became a focal point for global discussion. Communities began to explore local initiatives based on the Sumerian blueprint, advocating for resilient infrastructure, decentralized food systems, and cooperative social structures. Environmental groups found a powerful new ally in the ancient texts, using the Sumerian warnings to underscore the urgency of climate action and ecological stewardship. Architects and engineers started to re-evaluate their approaches to urban planning, drawing inspiration from the Sumerian designs for self-sufficient and adaptable settlements. The tablets, far from being just a source of fear, had become a catalyst for proactive change, sparking a global movement towards resilience and sustainability. The Sumerians, millennia ago, had indeed provided a roadmap, and humanity, through its own initiative, was slowly but surely beginning to follow it. The question of the celestial architects also entered the mainstream, igniting widespread philosophical and spiritual debates. Were we truly alone in the cosmos, or had our distant ancestors been guided by an intelligence beyond our current comprehension? The idea sparked renewed interest in space exploration, with governments and private companies redirecting resources towards projects aimed at identifying the fiery star and searching for other potential sources of cosmic knowledge. Religious institutions grappled with the implications for their own creation narratives, leading to a profound period of theological introspection and reinterpretation. The Sumerian tablets had not just rewritten history, they had fundamentally altered humanity's perception of its place in the universe, opening up vast new horizons of inquiry and challenging deeply held beliefs about our origins and destiny. The world, through the lens of these ancient texts, suddenly seemed far larger, far more mysterious, and infinitely more interconnected. The most profound impact, however, was on the collective human consciousness. The shared knowledge of a recurring celestial threat and the ancient blueprint for survival began to foster a nascent sense of global unity. While geopolitical divisions persisted, a growing understanding of shared destiny and common vulnerability started to bridge ancient divides. People from different nations, cultures, and backgrounds found common ground in the face of a challenge that transcended all earthly borders. The Sumerian tablets had, inadvertently, provided humanity with a shared narrative, a common purpose that, for the first time in recorded history, truly united the species. Alastair and Eleanor, witnessing this unprecedented global awakening, understood that their mission was far from over. The revelation was just the beginning. The real work, the actual preparation, the forging of a unified human response lay ahead. The forgotten Sumerians had delivered their message. Now it was up to humanity to decide its fate. What do you believe is the single most important lesson humanity can learn from the Sumerian tablets? If you had to prepare for a recurring global catastrophe, what would be your first step? Comment below with your essential thoughts and strategies. Your insights are invaluable as we collectively grapple with such profound ancient wisdom. The world had shifted irrevocably. The initial wave of panic had largely subsided, replaced by a deep-seated unease, yes, but also a remarkable surge of determination and innovation. The Sumerian tablets were no longer a mere academic curiosity. They were the most important documents on the planet, guiding a nascent global effort to prepare for the fiery star's eventual return. Governments, despite their inherent rivalries, found themselves compelled to act, driven by public pressure and the undeniable scientific consensus emerging from the Sumerian data. International task forces were established, bringing together experts from every field imaginable: astrophysicists, engineers, sociologists, agronomists, and even ethicists, all working under the shadow of an ancient warning. The sheer scale of cooperation was unprecedented, a testament to humanity's capacity for collective action when faced with a truly existential threat. Alastair and Eleanor, now revered figures but also weary from years of relentless work and constant scrutiny, found themselves advising these global bodies. They tirelessly explained the nuances of the Sumerian language, the intricacies of the astronomical charts, and the profound wisdom embedded in the ancient directives. They ensured that the spirit of the original message, one of unity, resilience, and conscious evolution, was not lost in the bureaucratic machinery of modern institutions. They championed open access to the Sumerian knowledge, fighting against attempts by certain powerful corporations to privatize or monopolize the survival technologies described in the tablets. Their relentless advocacy for the common good became as vital as their initial discovery, embodying the very essence of the ancient call for collective stewardship. The Sumerian blueprints for resilient infrastructure and sustainable agriculture began to be implemented on a global scale. Massive underground seed vaults, far more advanced than anything previously conceived, were being constructed in remote, geologically stable locations, designed to preserve the genetic diversity of Earth's flora for millennia. New agricultural techniques, inspired by the tablet's principles of ecological balance and resource efficiency, were revolutionizing food production, making communities more self-sufficient and less vulnerable to disruption. Coastal cities initiated ambitious projects to build advanced flood defenses and sea walls, drawing on Sumerian designs that detailed complex hydrological management systems. Entire communities were being redesigned with resilience as the core principle, moving away from vulnerable, sprawling urbanization towards adaptable, interconnected settlements. The world was quite literally reshaping itself, guided by the forgotten wisdom of a civilization that flourished 5 millennia ago. Yet the celestial architects and their true origin remained the most profound mystery. While the scientific community debated furiously, some positing a highly advanced, lost human civilization, others cautiously considering an extraterrestrial origin, the tablets themselves remained silent on this crucial detail. Alistair and Eleanor continued their research, delving into comparative mythology and archaeological anomalies that hinted at a global, pre-Sumerian diffusion of knowledge. They theorized that the architects might have been a species or a group whose purpose was to act as cosmic gardeners, tending to nascent civilizations across the galaxy, providing guidance and warnings when celestial cycles demanded it. This concept, initially dismissed as science fiction, began to gain traction as humanity grappled with the sheer audacity of the Sumerian knowledge and the unsettling implications of its origins. The message, it seemed, was not just about survival, but about a profound invitation to understand humanity's place within a much grander cosmic narrative. The philosophical and spiritual dimensions of the Sumerian message also continued to resonate deeply. The tablets' passages on the awakening of consciousness and the unlocking of latent human potential fostered a global movement for introspection and self-improvement. Many believed that preparing for the fiery star wasn't just about physical survival, but about a collective spiritual evolution, a shift in human values towards unity, empathy, and environmental stewardship. Meditation practices, mindfulness, and educational programs designed to foster critical thinking and global interconnectedness gained unprecedented popularity. The ancient Sumerians, it seemed, had not only left a survival manual, but also a guide to becoming a more enlightened, resilient species. The cataclysm, once feared solely as a destructive force, was now being viewed by many as a powerful catalyst for human transformation, an opportunity to shed old divisions and embrace a higher collective destiny. The fiery star itself, now a known object designated Nemesis by the international astronomical community, remained a constant, silent reminder of the looming challenge. While its direct impact was considered unlikely, its gravitational influence and the potential for a comet shower or significant solar flare activity during its perihelion passage were very real threats. The clock was ticking, and humanity was racing against time, guided by the cryptic wisdom of a long-lost civilization. The forgotten Sumerian tablets had indeed delivered a message across millennia, not just a warning, but a profound opportunity. They had forced humanity to confront its vulnerabilities, to shed its illusions of invincibility, and to embark on a path of unprecedented global cooperation and self-reflection. The future was still uncertain, fraught with challenges. But for the first time, humanity faced it together, armed with ancient knowledge and a newfound sense of shared purpose. The journey was far from over, but the first steps towards a new, more resilient future had been taken, all thanks to a handful of clay tablets buried in the sands of time. Could the celestial architects be awaiting humanity's response to their ancient warning, observing our progress from afar? Will the ultimate challenge of the fiery star be the test that finally unifies humanity forever? What do you think the next chapter of this incredible story holds? Comment below with your theories on humanity's ultimate fate and its connection to these ancient messages. And if you've been with us on this incredible journey to uncover history's most profound secrets, write, "I made it to the end," in the comments to let us know you're with us. If you found this journey into forgotten knowledge and cosmic mystery captivating, then subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge the conventional and reveal the hidden truths of our world. Give this video a like to support the tireless research and effort that goes into bringing these narratives to you. And for an even deeper dive into the implications of these revelations, click on the next video now playing on your screen. It promises to expand your understanding even further.